Welcome to PACKOLUTIon. In this podcast series, you'll hear the experts of the packaging industry talking about sustainability and the future of packaging. It is brought to you by Watron and hosted by one of its founders, Michaela Wachtel, and Sales Director Ton Kniepscher.
Welcome back to the second part of the podcast with Professor Pierre Pinard, President of the World Packaging Organization, WPO. Let's get right into it.
You live in Australia. Can you give us a brief overview of what is special in Australia about packaging?
You know, Australia is a very unique geographic located country in many respects because it has a very good climate. And if you visited the country, you'll know what I'm referring to, because in certain parts of the country, we have a very hot summer. Other parts of the country, we have a very cold winter. Not as cold as Europe, but we would quite easily get down to minus 10 degrees Celsius in parts of the country. But the warmer areas, we could go well over 50 degrees. So that's the one aspect. The second aspect is the size of the country. Now, you know, we're a continent on its own and one country in that continent. Bearing in mind that on east to west is roughly from Spain to Russia. We are the same size as the United States if you take out Hawaii and you take out Alaska. And we only 25 million people. America is 380 million. So it's a massive difference. And that massive difference is exactly the scenario that affects packaging. Why do I say this? How does packaging get affected by the geographic location and geographic size of the country? Simply because if one takes sustainability or recyclability or these sort of things, then we're only 25 million people. Compare that to the European region. You only have to travel 500 kilometers and you draw a circle, and you probably have 20 million people. When we try and collect glass, it is a major issue because the two largest cities, being Melbourne and Sydney, they generate enough glass to be able to recycle it. You can recycle glass anywhere, I understand that, but it's not economically viable to do that. Sydney and Melbourne generate enough glass to be economically viable. When you add in Perth, which is on the western side, 4,500 kilometers away from Sydney. Now, anyone in their right minds is not going to move broken bottles of glass 4,500 kilometers. And likewise, Brisbane down to Melbourne is about 2,200 kilometers. For us to move glass down to Melbourne, because that's where a lot of the recycling does, because of the wine industry being down in that region, there's a lot of, wine bottles being made. When I say a lot for Australian standards, not a lot for European standards. I accept that. But in our minds, it's a lot. But it's not. I mean, if you take the total packaging of Australia and the total packaging versus against the world, you know that we are only 0.3. That's not even 0.5% of global packaging. That's how small we are. And so these are the challenges that we come up with. Besides the fact that if you are packing something and moving it, say, from Melbourne up to Brisbane or from Melbourne up to the top end of our country up in Darwin or Cairns, which is right at the top in the north, you are going through extreme weather conditions and crossing areas where you could well exceed 50 degrees in summer. And it's going to take you a long time to get the trucks up there because that distance is nearly 5,000 kilometers. I hope I've painted a picture that gives you the challenges that a country like ours has. And that is why a number of European countries who are trying to test their products and their packaging against that particular product bring it out to Australia and they run the tests in this country to see how their packaging performs, which is fascinating, especially in the cold supply chain.
Let's stay on the topic of recycling here for a minute. You've already said that you visited many waste dumps around the world and told us there's much to be learned from a dump site. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
I love it when people ask that question because I think that I am one of a kind in the world. I think I've visited the most dump sites in relation to countries. I've seen so many different dump sites in different countries. They differ. You think dump sites are all the same. No, not at all. Dump sites differ. Why do dump sites differ? Purely because one learns an enormous amount from a dump site. And by talking to the people on the dump site, you even learn more. Because some of these dump sites, and I'm referring to places like Philippines, Cambodia, Nigeria, South Africa, some of the ones I've visited around the world. And when one talks to the people on them, you find out that some of them are living their third generation, have been living on that particular dump site. So they generate an income, small I'm sure, but however, they still generate some sort of income to be able to live and buy the necessities that you need, water and food. But when one looks closely, and sometimes the stench is quite profound, so you've got to be careful, because I always believe anything you can smell, all those particles are going into your lungs, so you've got to make sure you wear a mask. But when you look at the dump site and the items that are on the dump site, it's sad in that there are items there that should not be there. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about, let's talk packaging first. There are packaging items there that they should have been put in the right receptacle from the start. The problem is that many of these countries don't have the infrastructure to be able to collect by differentiating the type of packaging, metal, glass, plastic, and so on. I mean, that's a basic requirement that you need. So it ends up sort of not landfill, dump site full. And some of these dump sites are massive. I cannot describe the enormity. I remember seeing one in Africa, and I was talking to the gentleman who was in charge of that dump site, and I said to him, in my naivety at the time, there were many trucks coming in, and I said, how many trucks would come in here in a working day? Like about, say, 8 in the morning or 5 in the evening. And he looked at me in a sort of a condescending way. And I thought, whoopsie, am I asked the wrong question? And so he said to me, he heard the question 100% clearly because the answer was very clear. He said to me, those trucks never stop coming in 24/7, 365 days of the year. They never stop. It's just one truck after the next. It's a long line of trucks as far as the eye can see, and that was one dump site in Africa, in Central Africa. And so then when one looks and you see a lot of food, it's because I looked at some of the trucks that were bringing, let's say, fresh items to the dump site, and there was food on those trucks that probably should never have been thrown away in the first place. Hence why we are wasting anything between 35% and 50% of our food across the world, which is an enormous amount. If we don't throw any food away, no one in this world needs to go hungry.
Absolutely.
That's a separate question. But certainly dump sites, I've learned a lot about dump sites. In the earlier years, I used to detest going to dump sites. Now I actually find it fascinating because one learns from the dump site and what products in one country is very different to another country in terms of what they're throwing away. And that is the interesting part. I've never been to a dump site in Germany, for example, but I would love to go because I would compare that dump site in Germany to one that I've seen in Cambodia or Philippines or something like that. And it would be a very different item on the dump site.
That's something we can organize maybe for you if you come over to Europe next time.
I think we got a really, really interesting insight about the packaging world around the globe. It was like a little travel within our short period of time. So thank you very much for that. We are at the end of the episode now. Is there anything that you would like to add?
There's so much that one can talk about because it's been a fascinating and I say privilege in the true sense of that word, an absolute privilege to do what I do in the WPO. And the opportunities that I've had to visit countries that the normal person would not visit. And the huge benefit that I have that no matter what country that I go into, I have a host or a hostess. There is someone there that takes me around. There's someone there that speaks the language. There's someone there that I can ask the questions that a tourist can't ask. And I get to see things that the normal tourist never ever sees. I get from dump sites into industries. I talk to people on dump sites, and I talk to presidents and prime ministers of the country. Now, there is such diversity. On top of that, these enormous cultural differences that one sees from one country to the next. And just to be able to come back from these countries and then share it amongst the WPO members. And I know it's of great value to them, a great value to me to share these experiences. But for the rest of the WPO to hear what is going on in some of these countries, each person learns in a different way and takes meaningful stuff out of what I'm saying and implements aspects into their own country that improves the packaging in their own country. And so I have to say a privilege that I've had to be able and continue to have such opportunities.
To end this episode on a positive note, you've traveled the world for many years, as we've heard, and you've been able to help many people in many countries regarding packaging and sustainability. Can you tell us one of your stories, one of the stories that sticks to your mind?
Yeah, I can tell you many stories. You know, some of these countries I get back to the hotel or wherever I'm staying, I'm told I've stayed in such opulent hotels, and at the same time I've stayed in appalling hotels that you would never dream of ever staying in, with cockroaches crawling over your pillow. You know, I come away from these things and I'm in the plane flying back to Australia, and I think, who else has this privilege of doing just that, you know, being able to have this diversity? But it does bring me to a story, and I want to share this with you before I go. I've told it so many times because it is so meaningful. But I want you to take yourself into rural Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was in this particular event. And I was giving some training there for a week of training in packaging technology at a very elementary introductory level. And one of the days we decided to do a field trip into sort of the heart of normal living in Lagos, bearing in mind that 70% of all goods sold in Nigeria are on the open market. And so we ventured into one of the larger open markets in Nigeria. Let me say that an entourage, but let me rather say I was there with about 5 other folk from the region. And we were looking particularly at packaging, right? So, and we were focusing on meeting a few people and asking them, you know, are they having any issues or problems, and how can we help, et cetera, et cetera. And we came to this sort of fairly youngish lady, probably put it about 30, 35, somewhere around there. And she was selling coffee beans, only coffee beans. That was her stall. And we got chatting. But I had to have an interpreter because she couldn't understand English. And we asked her how long has she been in selling coffee beans. Now, while we were talking, I was looking at her product. And the product didn't look so great, especially the bulk bags coming in from her supplier. They had a lot of perspiration on the inside, and I noticed this. And I said to her, through the interpreter, how long have you been doing this? And she said to me, I've been doing it for about 12 years. But my mother had the store before me, and she had done it all her life. And then she became unwell, and so I took the business over. I said, oh. And I said, where do you get your coffee beans? And I pointed to the bulk bags of, I think they were 50-pound bags or something. They were large, they were really, you know, a good size. And I said, where does that come from? And she said, no, the farmer brings it in once a week. He comes in his horse-drawn cart in the blazing sun of West Africa, and he brings me coffee beans. And I said, how does he bring them? And she said, he brings them in those bags. And he has done that when my mother ran the business. So we're talking probably, I don't know, 30, 40 years they've been using those bags. And I said, and are you having any trouble in any way with your sales of your coffee? And, you know, how long does your product last for? And these sort of questions. And from this discussion, this particular aspect, we had to really work hard in getting the answers from her. In a nutshell, she said, I do have problems. The shelf life is very short. She didn't use those words, but I'm using them now in explaining. She said the shelf life is very short when she compares herself to her competitors elsewhere in the open market. And that's a problem because it costs her sales. I said, I can see why. You've got moisture inside your bag. And she said, yes, I know. And so I turned around and I said, and I knew there was a supplier that was in the group of 5 with me that was in flexible packaging. And he, amongst other things, was blowing bags. And I said to him, can you make this lady? And I gave him the specification of what I wanted in size, but also putting perforation holes into the bag. And I said to the lady, through the interpreter, tell the lady that we're going to organize I think it was 100 bags. And she must give that to the farmer, and he must only use these bags, and all the other bags should not be used anymore, and they should rather be destroyed. But here are the replacement bags for the farmer. And I wished her well, and I said, my colleagues will stay in touch with you. Fast forward, about 4 months later, I'm talking to my colleague in Nigeria, our WPO representative, and I said, tell me, how's that lady doing in the open market with the coffee beans? And he said to me, well, funny you ask. I spoke to her last week. I said, and what? What happened? She said she was smiling from ear to ear because she no longer has perspiration building up in the coffee bean bags, and her sales have increased. She's buying more coffee from the farmer. The farmer's happy. It's a win-win all over. I said, it's fantastic. So, this just explains how simple packaging can be. And if you don't know the science behind it, how do you fix these problems? If I never came across that lady, she wouldn't be a smiling person today, I'm sure. And such a simple change in that format of packaging made that lady's whole future completely different.
It also proves the point that packaging itself prevents food waste.
Exactly, so true. You have the right packaging and you won't have food waste.
Yeah.
And that's why packaging can help a lot in our 35% food wastage around the world.
I have one more additional question, which I was dying to ask. I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you have done and are still doing many guest lectures voluntarily at international universities around the world. And these go from packaging engineering to packaging design technology and packaging science. How does this affect your view as a packaging professional?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't had that question for a long, long time. So, I love talking. I'm sure you picked that up. I love sharing. I love sharing about packaging because many people think they know about packaging, but they know it from a usage perspective. They know it from their grocery cupboard and the frustrations they sometimes have in certain packs that they can't open, that from that perspective. But to understand the science behind it or the technology behind it makes all the more difference to that user. And so by me lecturing at these various universities around the world, and they are very varied because some of them are certainly in developed countries, like Austria, like United States, but some of them are in developing countries, Vietnam, for example, Indonesia. There's such a difference in the student between those different type of countries in relation to developed or developing. The experiences that I've had in moving around the world, I can now bring these into the classroom or into the lecture halls and explain to them firsthand of actual physical aspects of packaging working in one place but will not work in another place. And this is why it is so, like the coffee bean scenario, because some universities focus very heavily on sciences, on the material sciences. Other universities, like in China, I find they focus a lot on the engineering. And so different universities focus on different elements of packaging. So people think packaging is all one thing. No, there are different segments to this packaging, and different universities focus on different elements of it. And so when I come there, I bring these all together and try and give them an overall picture of how the one interrelates and how the one aspect of packaging affects the other aspect of packaging. And then ultimately, what are we trying to do? We're trying to bring better packaging to more people around the world. That's what we're trying to do. And if we achieve that, at the same time, we're going to reduce food waste, for example. And I explain this from a practical sense. because my experience is field experience. And a lot of lecturing or lecturers in the universities around the world are academic. Not many of them, some of them certainly, but not many of them have actually had industrial life out there experiences. Yeah. And so I think it's a plus if we can bring someone into the classroom that has the practical field experiences into a classroom environment for those youngsters, that they can learn at that young age already. These are the mistakes that are being made. We no longer need to make them. And I'm going to explain one of these mistakes to you. In 1984 or 1982, somewhere around there, Tetra Pak produced the milk carton, for example, or the juice carton.
Yep.
We all know that shape. They themselves will tell you that they could have made it any shape when they designed the Tetra Pak or the Tetra Brick, as we know it, that particular shape. But they designed that particular shape. Why? Because it is a 6-meter shipping container reduced to the size of 1 liter. So when they fill up a shipping container, they get an incredibly good space efficiency of something like well in the 90s, anything between 96 and 99% space efficiency in a shipping container. Okay. In 2022, we have people around the world still making that error. And they don't get primary packaging correct in relation to a pallet or a shipping container. How could Tetra Pak get it right in 1984 and we still make the error elsewhere in the world today? That part I find extremely frustrating and such a waste of space, such a waste of money. Shipping air across the world.
I agree with that. That brings us to the end of another episode of our podcast, PACKOLUTIon. Thank you, Pierre, so much for sharing your experience and your global vision with us. Very, very interesting for us and hopefully for our listeners as well. Please stay tuned to this channel for more inspiring episodes of PACKOLUTIon with experts like Pierre in the packaging industry. Thank you.